Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Chaim Richman here, together with the inimitable and indefatigable and ever-gracious Samara.
Hi, Rabbi. Hello, everyone.
Sitting in for Yitzchak Reuven, who is away at an undisclosed location. Today, the 21st day of the month of Mar Cheshvan, 5780. The 19th of November 2019, and this Shabbat, Parashat Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. And it's also Shabbat Mavarchim, the Sabbath of the blessing of the new moon for the incoming month of Kislev, which will be next Thursday and Friday. The month of Kislev, of course, plays host to the festival of Hanukkah, 8-day festival commemorating the rededication of the temple in the Second Temple period from the hands of the invading Greeks, or Greek Syrians as they're called in history. And the month of Kislev is all about revealing the hidden light of creation which shines forth, hidden within the world, hidden within each and every one of us. And Chayei Sarah is an amazing Torah portion, and this Shabbat actually traditionally is called Shabbat Hebron. It's the Sabbath upon which thousands and maybe tens of thousands of Jews from all over the country and from all over the world really converge upon the ancient biblical city of Hebron in order to be in the proximity of the tomb of the patriarchs. For this Shabbat, the Torah reading talks about Avraham coming to bury his beloved Sarah in this place, and by the end of the parsha, he's also buried there by his children, and many Jews come to spend Shabbat as guests of the city, the Jewish community, the rather beleaguered Jewish community of Hebron. They come to identify with its residents. Like someone who lives in Hebron once said to me, when people ask him, why do you live there? Because it's not easy to live there, because the Jews are subjected to a lot of difficulties from the Arabs. And he said to me, well, I like to live near my parents. That's the secret of living in Hebron. Marat HaMachpela, the tomb of the patriarchs, we spoke about it a lot last week. It is a place of overwhelming spiritual power. And actually, Samara and I and some other people were there together not long ago, and we got the opportunity to pray there. It's just a tremendous portal. It is, I think the spiritual feeling there is absolutely overwhelming.
It was amazing. It was an amazing experience, and especially to have been there with you, Rabbi.
Oh, gosh. But according to our sages of blessed memory, when a person leaves this world, when the neshama leaves the body, it actually passes through Marat HaMachpela.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's the Zohar. A person actually, it's like that is, as when we learned that is the entrance to Gan Eden, even in the process of every neshama, every soul returning to Hashem, it plays a role. It's a certain kind of a spiritual level, and everyone goes there, as it were, through the gateway provided by the forefathers, because they were, again, such trailblazers. I got to tell you, we are learning in all of these weeks about Avraham and Sarah. It's really a lifetime of study to really appreciate who they were, their incredible spiritual stature, their incredible power. Avraham and Sarah are called the first of the converts, as it were, to Judaism. And also, they're also called tzaddikim, perfectly righteous people. They're also called the leaders, as it were, of a global movement of teshuvah, of returning to Hashem. And their entire life's work was about turning people on to the one God, and it was a very slow process. We learned in the very beginning verses of Parshat Lech Lecha, when they were leaving towards the land of Canaan, that they brought with them V'as nefesh asher asu b'Charan. They brought with them the souls that they created in Haran, meaning the people that they brought to Hashem, as Rashi puts it, the people that they brought under the wings of the Shekhinah. And Avraham was such an iconoclast. He was so against the stream. He was so bold and brave and amazing. And it's just incredible to describe what they were all about, their mission, their ministry, as it were, of just reaching so many people. And what they bequeathed to the world is actually the bedrock of everything that is right in the world today, the last vestige of morality, the last vestige of hope, and the last glimmer of the knowledge of God that's still available in this world is from Avraham and Sarah. And there's a verse. The verse is very amazing. It's in our parsha this week of Chayei Sarah, chapter 24 and verse 1. It says, Avraham zaken, and Avraham was old, ba bayamim. Ba bayamim is literally translated, well, not literally, but it's translated easier, or in an easier way to read. It's translated here in the version I'm looking at, well on in years. But ba bayamim, Samara, what does that literally mean?
Coming of days?
Yes, that he came in his days. Ba, coming or came in days. And there's a very interesting passage in one of our sources of tradition. It's actually, again, the Zohar reads on this verse that the explanation of this phrase that he came in days is that he did not draw close to Hashem in one day or in one time, but his own deeds and his own relentless soul-searching and struggle to find the truth brought him a little closer every day, a little bit more. And that is the idea of those days that he literally came closer to Hashem day by day. And that is an incredibly inspirational thought, I think, for us, because we look around at people, we look around in the days of social media, everybody compares themselves to other people. And I actually read about a study that said that when people check other people's status and a news feed and your other people's homepage and everything on Facebook all day long, it is actually a major contributor to depression and to a negative self-image, because people are always comparing themselves to others. And why aren't I like him? Why aren't I doing as much as that person? Avraham, he built such an incredible empire of truth in a world that was totally devoid of truth. Don't forget, we also learned about Avraham that he had no teacher. He had no spiritual mentor. He had no one to show him the way. So instead, his own two kidneys were his teachers. That's a very enigmatic and beautiful expression that our sages tell us. His kidneys were his teachers. It's very evocative. What that means, basically, since he had no one to teach him, is that he had to rely on his own intuitive wisdom. It came from within him. Hashem spoke from within him. And he was so, again, relentless and fearless and tireless in searching for the truth that he found it. So, but it wasn't in one day, Babi Amim. It wasn't just in one day. And so that needs to serve us well, to remind us that we must never give up. We must never give up hope. We must never become frustrated. We must never become complacent, because we always learn that complacency is the greatest danger to serving God. When we get used to something, when we take something for granted, whether it's a relationship with Hashem or a relationship with another person, when things become too taken for granted and too by rote, then they become empty of meaning. And it was never like that with Avraham. That's one level of understanding this evocative phrase, Ba Bayamim, chapter 24 and verse 1, that he came in his days. That it was a day-by-day process of growing closer to Hashem. Samara, as my technical support system in this particular broadcast, I must turn to you and ask you, is everything okay? I see you're a little concerned over there.
Everything's fine.
Are you sure? Are we recording?
Moving right along, Rabbi.
Okay, if there's any issues and I'm just talking into a blank microphone and nobody will ever hear us, let me know. Or don't even. Anyway, that's one level of understanding of Babi Amim. But there's another idea, which I find so incredibly moving. and powerful about this expression in the Torah, ba b'yamim, that Avraham, he came in his days. And that is even more staggering than the previous idea. And that idea is that the days that we have on this earth, the days that we, and I think it's not for naught that there is a phrase that people use without thinking that's been part of the lexicon of mankind since time immemorial. We talk about spending time. We spend time like we spend a currency. We spend time because it's something that can be wasted, and it's something that you can use, and it's something that you won't get back. We spend it, and sometimes we waste it. But anyway, Babi Amim, according to this understanding, is that every day is almost like, or is actually, not almost, but is a entity. It is like a physical being. It's like a presence. It's like a thing that doesn't go away. What is it that Ernest Hemingway said in one of his short stories? An incredible line. He said, I never can remember if it was Hemingway or Faulkner, but I'm pretty sure it was Hemingway. He said, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. I always liked that. So according to this understanding of our sages, Ba Bayamim really means that, let's say a person's living their life and they have a day. And every day, first of all, is different, and no day is coming back again, even though the past isn't dead, it's not even past. But that day that we had, that we spent, isn't coming back. But that day, it doesn't disappear, it goes somewhere. You know where it goes? It's full of powers that we created through our own, hopefully, positivity, or God forbid, negativity. We created, whether we created an accuser, or we created a defense attorney, of our own doing, of our own signature. And the days, literally the days that we spend, will rise up to testify either for us or against us. So at the end of the day, when you're ready to retire, the day is there in the corner of the room, lurking, looking at you, maybe beaming with pride and happiness, or maybe smirking, and maybe it's not. I don't know. It depends. But the day is something that we created, and that will serve as our ticket of passage to wherever it is that we're going. So Avraham Zaken Ba Bayamim. First of all, in this week's Torah portion, the video lesson, we speak a lot about the concept of old age. Avraham had a very singular relationship with old age. He's described as Zaken, old, specifically because there is a very, very, and again I use the word enigmatic, very difficult to understand teaching that our sages tell us that until Avraham's time there was no old age. That Yitzchak, for example, looked exactly like Avraham. And there was a lot of confusion in the world because there was no distinction between the generations. And Avraham prayed about this and received old age. And then from that time on, people were visibly older when they became older. Now again, you can take a teaching like that from our sages and just think it's like whimsical, or think it's anecdotal, or think it's silly, or think it's a wives' tale or a fairy tale. And some people do think that because they don't understand that the wisdom of the sages that elucidates the written Torah is so full of Hashem's wisdom, and that these things are not literal. They are metaphorical. They are poetic. They teach us a profound life lesson. So the idea is basically that, and this is what we talk about in this week's video lesson, is that the old age that we're referring to regarding Avraham is not just about white hair or wrinkles. It's about wisdom. It's about life experience. It's about what proper age brings about, the understanding. And he's the master of that. He's the master of that because he is the one 20 generations after Adam who restored basically the divine image to mankind, and who restored the legacy of what it means to be Adam. That's why he so much wanted to be next to Adam, right, when he ran into that cave after the calf. And that was his responsibility. But that's the idea of old age, that he represents the acquisition of a deeper, lasting relationship with Hashem. But what happened here is that he was also Amim means that when he came to Hashem, as it were, he wore his days like a royal cloak. A person can wear their days like rags, like a shameful garment, or maybe even like a garment full of holes. In fact, that reminds me of one of the most profound teachings of our sages that refers to a spiritual garment called the Chalukah de Rabbanan. Chalukah de Rabbanan is something that we mention in the daily meditation every morning in the prayer that we say before we put on the talit. It could be translated as the rabbi's cloak, and it's a spiritual garment, and what it refers to, and it's what the talit, the large talit that we wear, what it actually symbolizes. What it represents is that a person comes into this world naked and leaves this world naked, other than the fact that you can't stand before Hashem in the next world naked. You have to be covered. And the only covering that you have is the garment that's referred to esoterically as the Chalukah de Rabbanan, which is created by one's deeds. And every mitzvah that we fulfill, every good deed that we do, every good thing that we do in this world, stitches another length of fabric, as it were, in that garment so that it covers us. And that I reminded myself of that because that's this idea also, the way I understand that, because literally Amim means that he came in his days, really. He came in his days, and it conjures up this imagery of a person who is actually clothed in the greatness of what his days were. Anyway, really can't talk about Avraham and Sarah enough, but I will talk about Sarah. And by the way, on that note of this unique relationship and understanding of old age, equaling wisdom and a deeper understanding, a deeper relationship with Hashem that Avraham's old age represents, he also, at the same time, and we've learned about this in the past, he also was somehow the master of youth, and I think perpetual youth. And on this line, in this vein, also, the sages of blessed memory teach us something extraordinary. And again, you have to open up your heart in the deepest way and understand the unbelievably wonderful and moving and powerful spiritual vehicle of the Midrash that our sages tell us, which is a homiletical way of teaching the Torah. And this is the statement that our sages make. And again, a fool would take these things literally and think that it's a literal statement, and then they'll be able to argue it and say that's ridiculous. This is what our sages say. They say, you know what, Avraham minted a coin, which is not so far from a possibility, because we know that he was actually a ruler. We know that, the sages tell us that he also actually ruled in Damascus. He was a ruler, and in ancient times people were measured by coinage. So the sages say he minted a coin. But you know what was special about this coin? Abraham's coin had two sides, of course. The coin has two sides. On one side, there was a picture of a couple in old age. And on the other side, it was a couple, a man and a woman, in youth. Some people mistakenly think, in my opinion, that the coin depicts Avraham and Sarah on one side and Yitzchak and Rivka on the other side. But you know what I think? I think they're both Avraham and Sarah, because I think that is a pan, an aspect of teaching us that Avraham not only was the master of zikna, of old age, but he was the master of youth, meaning that he might have asked for old age to be recognizable, and he might have been the master of what old age really is all about, which is a deep acquisition of knowledge, but he didn't get old. He didn't get old. His mind didn't get old. He was perpetually young, because again, to be perpetually young in our service of Hashem and fresh and excited, for everything to be novel, for us to be starting every day all over again, and so that we could be Amim, that's the secret of Avraham Avinu. So I think that's really what that teaching means. Anyway, the parsha is called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, even though it's not about the life of Sarah. It's about the death of Sarah. But interestingly, her life isn't recorded here. Rather, the parsha starts with her death, and yet it's called the life of Sarah, which is indicative of what life and death are really all about, how life is measured. And of course, a point that we've also made that's just so intriguing is the fact that until this time in history, 20 generations after the time of Adam HaRishon, so many countless people have died. So many countless people have been missed and mourned by their loved ones. So many countless people have been buried. But yet, this is the first time in the entire Torah that the death and burial of someone is recorded. Yes, this is the first time in the Torah, Parshat Chayei Sarah, that Avraham came to bury Sarah and to eulogize her. He cried for her. Is the first time in the entire Torah that we have a record of someone being actually buried. Why is that? Everyone else was also buried. And the answer, of course, is because of what Sarah's life teaches us and how a person is measured and what the point of having a burial plot is not just so that the person, it's not for the person's own good, it's so that the whole world will be inspired that there really was such a person. The world will be able to come there and pray to Hashem, can we also be like this person? Can we learn from this person? So Avraham came to eulogize Sarah, and the sages teach us something that many people are not aware of, that the entire chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs, the famed Eshet Chayil, the poem of King Solomon, a woman of valor, that we sing at the table on Friday night, that is actually Avraham's eulogy of Sarah. Did you know that, Samara?
No, I didn't know that either.
Yes, the famed poem, Eshet Chayil, the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, is Avraham's eulogy of Sarah. Anyway, I want to talk more about the experience of Hebron. You know, Hebron, the root of that word is chaver, which means friend, which is related to chibur, which means connection, which is what Avraham was. First of all, Avraham is the connection that connected the whole world to Hashem, and also Hashem called Avraham his friend. And Hebron is also the secret of the land of Israel, the acquisition of the land of Israel. Small wonder that King David, before he reigned in Jerusalem, reigned in Hebron for 7 years. And small wonder that Hebron is one of the seats of contention for Jewish sovereignty in this land, and how our relationship with that city and our presence there is constantly being undermined and attacked. And I do hear the music, Samara, and hopefully with no technical difficulties we will be back for the second half of Temple Talk. Stay with us, Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk from Jerusalem, Israel, for this 21st day of the month of Cheshvan, 5780. That's November the 19th, 2019. The Shabbat, Parshat Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. Rabbi Chaim Richman here together with, I believed I called her the inimitable. Did I say inscrutable? No, inimitable. Ever gracious Samara, filling in for Yitzchak Reuven, who is not here. And that's all we're authorized to say about that right now. We've been talking about Avraham and Sarah, the incredible impact that they had on the world. We've been talking about the city of Hebron, the tomb of the patriarchs, gateway to the Garden of Eden, on an individual level as well, as some sort of relationship that every soul has with that place, it being the source, as it were, of life, of Adam HaRishon being there, of the forefathers being there. What is life anyway? Life is actually eternal. The force of life is eternal. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, the neshama inside of a person is what we are. Actually, the body is not the real person. It's the neshama, which is the real person. And the soul, when it leaves this body, goes on to another level of existence, which is in many ways the true level of existence. We're talking about Avraham and Sarah and their incredible spiritual pioneering that they did in this world. And I also mentioned in the previous half the concept of how the Midrash, the homiletical teachings of our sages, shed such an important light on the Torah through the amazing vehicle that they employ of allegory, of Midrash, of homily, of metaphor. And you have to really understand how this works. I want to give you another example that's pretty amazing, okay? So we have a verse. It's actually in, 1 second, it's in last week's Torah portion, I believe. I'm going to go to chapter 21. We're in Vayera still. And in chapter 1 and verse 24, chapter 21 and verse... Hold on just a second. Samara, give me some banter in the background.
Interesting bit of news this morning.
Oh, I'm going to get to that. Don't spoil it. Okay, I found what I needed.
Spoiler alert.
All right. I'm sorry. I was lost for a second. Now I'm found. Chapter 21 and verse 8, talking about when Yitzchak was born, and when Yitzchak was finished nursing, right? Let me start a few verses back earlier in chapter 21, talking about the birth of Isaac. Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Whoever hears will laugh for me." By the way, Yitzchak actually means laughter, future tense. Will laugh is what Yitzchak really means. And she said, who is the one who said to Abraham, Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne a son in his old age. And then the next verse 8, reads, the child grew and was weaned. Avraham made a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. Now, the backstory of these incredible verses, and by the way, this whole idea of Yitzchak being called laughter, and her laughing, the subject of Sarah laughing is very, very deep. I need 2,000 years to go through all of the insights about what that laughter was really all about. But Yitzchak itself, that name, denoting laughter, is this the explanation for why Jews are such great comedians? Because we need to deal with such a weighty, heavy cosmic force all the time? Or is it the fact that there's something about Yitzchak that's like a cosmic kind of laugh in a way? Because after all, not only were Avraham and Sarah, both of them, incapable of having a child, and Hashem actually more than made a miracle, he actually reversed their very nature. But Yitzchak also, not only was he brought to the altar, but according to the deepest insights, he was actually burnt on the altar, even though Avraham stopped before he slaughtered him because he was told to stop, but the fire was burning and he slipped, Yitzchak slipped and he was burnt up, and then he came back to life. All this meaning, again, on one level, that Yitzchak, it's like, the world is like not so much his place, you know what I'm saying? He's like supernature somehow. He's like not really shayach, not really like so applicable to the circumstances of this world. And that's like the Jewish people altogether. We're out there. You know what I'm saying? We're out there. But anyway, I digress very, very much. So getting back to these verses, Avraham made a great feast. Why is it called a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned? Our sages tell us it's called a great feast because all the greatest people of the generation were there. And it was a great feast. But here's the thing, and this is chilling and powerful, and another life-changing lesson of our great sages, and another insight into the power of the Midrash. So it's like this. Avraham and Sarah, everybody knew they were very, very old, and they couldn't have children. And then Sarah miraculously, she turned young. Speaking of that coin again, her body turned young, and she had a child, with everything that entails. And people couldn't believe it. The Midrash says that people were mocking and scoffing and not believing it. They were saying, this is ridiculous. What are they trying to pull here? What kind of a scam is this? It's like a scam. And people were saying, you know what? They actually just took some kid from the shuk, like a foundling, and they're saying this is our kid. She didn't have a child. And there's a very famous midrash that says that it's called the scoffers of the generation, they're called, right? Leitzanei Hador. They were like, what is this? What are you trying to sell us here? What are you trying to pull here? You couldn't have had a kid. You took some kid, and you're telling us that he's your kid. That's what the Midrash says. But what happened? At this feast, the Midrash says, everybody brought their babies. All the women brought their babies, and Sarah nursed every single one of them. And then they said, oh, she really did have Yitzchak. He really is her son, when they saw that. That's all she wrote. That's what the Midrash says. But now I want to analyze it in the light of the great wisdom of our sages and what they're trying to tell us. Again, these are not stories. This is the authority of Sinai. This is the Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is the oral Torah that Hashem gave over to Moshe. And everything here is very, very powerful and full of meanings. Let me tell you what this means. This is what it means. First of all, what is it that they were really saying when they were saying, you think Sarah really had a baby, Avraham and Sarah had a baby? Come on. What they were really trying to say is, they were trying to question the hemshechiyut of the Klal Yisrael. They were trying to call into doubt that there could be such a thing as the Jewish people in this world, that there won't be any continuation. This is exactly what's going on in the world today. This is what they were really trying to say. This is what they were really trying to say. No, this is like a one-time thing. Okay, you had an Avraham, but to give over what he learned and what he stood for to a people, to his children, no. Okay, he was thrown into the furnace and came out. Okay, he dedicated his whole life to the service of the one true God. Okay, he taught the whole world about God. Okay, he had a tent that was open from all four sides because he didn't rest for a minute because he was trying to emulate God and do chesed all the time. But you can't give that over to anybody. You can't have another generation. That's what they meant when they said he's not really their kid. And then what's the continuation of the Midrash? Then Sarah nursed all these children, all the babies that were brought to that great feast, and then they said, oh, you know what? It's true. She really did have Yitzchak. Let me tell you what it means. What it really means is, because it's not literal. And again, people are going to say, what are you trying to tell us? That Sarah nursed hundreds of babies. No, that's not what it means at all. What is nursing? What is mother's milk? It represents nurturing. It represents giving over something from the source that's true. It represents the passing over of something from one generation to the other with compassion and in the right measure. What the Midrash is conveying is that Avraham and Sarah single-handedly, as it were, they gave birth to the whole world. They gave birth to everyone in that generation. They gave over in like mother's milk. They gave over everything. And Sarah, we're talking so much about Avraham, but who was Sarah? Who was she? This is who she was. She was the matriarch of the world, and she gave over to the whole world. It's as if she nursed the whole world. She brought them to Hashem. And then when they saw that, they said, oh, you know what? This is real. This is lasting. This is going to be. Yitzchak is her son. There really is a Yitzchak in the world. This is really going to take. This is really going to continue. That's what that incredible Midrash is coming to teach us. So these are some of the most beautiful teachings in the world that we're sharing, and it's important for us to understand the relationship between the written Torah and the oral Torah, and how the written Torah is basically like a shorthand. It's incomplete without the insights. So the sages that were given over by Hashem to Moshe and given over in every single generation, it's not rabbinic, as it were. It's not man-made. It is actually the living Torah is what it's all about. So we're talking about Avraham and Sarah. We're talking about Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. We're talking about the burial of both Sarah and later in the Parsha Avraham also in the Cave of Machpela in Hebron, to where many Jews will be flocking this weekend, this Shabbat. And then back in chapter 13 of the book of Genesis, which was again Parshat Lech Lecha, chapter 13 and verse 17. What did Hashem say to Avraham when he was still Avram? He said to him, arise, kum, hithalech ba'aretz, arise, get up and walk about the land through its length and breadth, for to you will I give it. And our sages teach that Avraham walked over the entire land of Israel, as God commanded in this very verse. I'm sorry, but he did command it. It's right here. You can't deny it. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, Hashem told Avram. Were you ever wondering why? Our sages teach us because Hashem said, this will enable your children to conquer it. You know what? Again, we've taught many times how amazing it is that even though Hashem bequeathed the entire land of Israel to Avraham through Yitzchak, shall your seed be called, for perpetuity, still, there's only 3 places in the entire land which the Torah records a deed of sale in regard to them, as if to say, I gave you the whole land, okay, but there's 3 places that represent this Jewish acquisition, ownership of the land. And those 3 places, the Torah actually bothers to record that money was paid for them so that no one could ever contest it. And those 3 places, of course, are, in chronological order, actually this week, Avraham purchasing this field of Machpela from Ephron the Hittite. And then we have actually King David purchasing the threshing floor from Aravna the Jebusite, the site of the Holy Temple. And actually, before that, the purchase of the city of Shechem, burial place of Yosef by Yaakov. So these 3 places are actually so hotly disputed. And according to the international community, it's not really Israel, it's occupied territory. Even East Jerusalem is occupied territory, even though Jerusalem, of course, was never the capital of any people in the world other than the Jews, never an Arab capital, not mentioned in the Quran, etc., etc. We've hashed that through quite a while. And Hebron and Shechem, these are the very symbols of Jewish presence in the biblical heartland of the land of Israel. And yes, Hashem said to Avraham, walk about it. All this is so amazing for today's broadcast. I couldn't have written the script. It's too good to be true that we can talk about this today as we're talking about Avraham's relationship to Hebron and Samara. Almost gave it away. I just wasn't ready for it yet. And that is that yesterday, Mike Pompeo, this United States Secretary of State, in the reversal of decades of American policy, State Department policy, made a statement that basically declared that the settlements do not violate international law. So this administration, the Trump administration, not only recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the embassy there, not only has been withholding funding from the United Nations agency responsible for Palestinian refugees because of the UNRWA's nature of trying to undermine Israel in every possible way, but it has now actually declared, again reversing decades of American foreign policy, declared that the Israeli settlements in the so-called occupied territories are not, per se, a violation of international law. And I'm like, duh. It's like Prime Minister Netanyahu summed it up. It is righting a historical wrong. Righting a historical wrong because, as the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, tweeted, in rejecting the foundational lie, I have to say that again because it's such an important statement, in rejecting the foundational lie that the Jewish people are foreign colonialists in our own homeland, President Trump, Secretary Pompeo, and U.S. Ambassador Geoffrey Friedman have made an essential contribution to the advance of peace. And of course, the left wing and the Democrats, same thing, they're all saying how terrible this is. First of all, if Trump did it, it must be terrible. Second, I don't usually allow myself to be pulled into this maelstrom, but that's the truth. Second of all, what they're concerned about is that all of the elements that they call the core elements of the framework for the establishment of the two-state solution, he's basically taking them apart. Yeah, that would be so wonderful, because the two-state solution, which is basically being sought by international community to basically spell out the demise of Israel, the two-state solution, that's what it would be. It would be the total destruction of the state of Israel. But I just think it's so fitting and so beautiful that in this very week of the reading of Parshat Chayei Sarah, which details Avraham's purchase of what Hebron is all about, meaning he purchased Hebron. That's what Hebron is, right? And the Torah testifying to that. And Hebron really representing the cradle of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. As I mentioned, King David had to be king in Hebron before he was king in Jerusalem. For the President of the United States of America, and battle that he is, to be behind a statement so beautifully articulated by the Secretary of State. I used to hate to say the expression Secretary of State when it was in the hands of other people whose names I vowed practically never to mention again. You know who I'm talking about. It has to do with ketchup, his family and everything. For him to say that this is actually not a violation of international law, that's a very beautiful thing, because how could it be? Because how could you be a settler in your own land? And the whole expression of settlements and settlers is so absolutely ridiculous. It's so ludicrous. It's so horrible. But again, there are processes at work in this world. And you know what? Last week, Israel was facing a barrage of rockets from Gaza. By the way, last night, 4 rockets were fired from Syria into northern Israel. I don't know if you heard about that, gentle listeners. They were taken down by the Iron Dome. But last week, we faced, 450 rockets within like 55 hours. Mainstream media, I don't even know. I was talking to someone in America, a good person. They didn't even hear, they had no idea what I was talking about. No idea. And when it was covered, it was all talking about how Israel murdered some person that they referred to as Mr., referring to the targeted assassination of an arch-terrorist with so much Israeli blood on his hands, of women and children. And thank God we took him out. And I wish Israel would go back to constant calculated targeted assassination. But in any event, the retaliation for that from Gaza, of course, was a barrage of rockets. But not only did mainstream media not cover it, but the Democrats of America basically, as one editorial wrote, whistled and looked the other way. And it's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. And, of course, now all the front runners today of the Democratic race, they've all come out and strongly condemned this move by the State Department. Again, Trump did it, so that's bad enough. But also because it just figures in with their whole platform, which is a platform of institutionalized anti-Semitism, led by Bernie Sanders, who is so upfront about the fact that he spent a few weeks in 1963 on a kibbutz. He thinks he knows all about Israel, but basically he denies the anti-Semitism that's being propagated by the left wing. And even in an essay that he wrote recently about confronting anti-Semitism, it didn't offer any instructions in fighting anti-Semitism, but it just instead alternated between criticizing Israel and pretending anti-Semitism doesn't exist on the left. But you know what? It's like I'm reading the news yesterday, right? And I'm reading that this student union at the University of Toronto, this graduate student union, which already passed a bill in favor of boycott, divestment, and sanction of Israel, of course. The student union of the University of Toronto called for the Hillel Jewish program there on the university not to be able to provide kosher food to Jewish students because kosher food is pro-Israel. And there was such an outcry by this news that the University of Toronto Student Union called kosher food being made available to Jewish students pro-Israel that they apologized. They apologized, and they say apologize for unintentionally causing harm towards the Jewish community. after a union official suggested that the executive board would not support a campaign by the school sale to make kosher food available on campus since it's pro-Israel. So what am I trying to say? The whole thing in this week of Avraham and Sarah, and how ironically that the Midrash says that when Avraham passed away, all the great leaders of the world stood up and cried when Avraham passed away, and they said, "Woe to the world that no longer has the captain of the ship." But today, anti-Semitism is anti-Israel. They're not separate anymore. It's out there. If you don't have, it used to be that people would say, "I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just against Israel." But now, no, it's the same thing. I understand kosher food is pro-Israel. Thank God I hear the music. Anyway, Shabbat Parshat Chayei Sarah. So much to learn. Samara, thank you so much for being here with us on Temple Talk.
My pleasure, Rabbi Richman.
Shalom, everybody. Temple Talk.